friends. Last time we were together, I spoke about English paper piecing templates, and I opened my package of English paper pieces from Tales of Cloth, which was very exciting. And then we talked about some fabric prep and did some starching. Today, we're going to go on to the next step. We are going to talk about cutting out our fabric and basting our fabric onto our English paper pieces. So let's get started. This fabric that I chose for the center of my medallion of my Pirouette quilt, I chose mostly because I like the colors of it. It's got beautiful blues and teals and these olive greens. And another thing that I really liked about it are the motifs. One of the things that is easy to do with English paper piecing, definitely easier to do than traditional quilting, is to fussy cut pieces so that when you sew those pieces together, you make a whole new motif. You'll see what I mean. And I chose this fabric because I think these flowers, these bigger flowers here, and this pretty little leafy flower here will make a really lovely motif for the center of my quilt. So I'm going to show you how I came up with that. These little pieces. You really have to visualize, and there are some tools that you can use to help you visualize. So the center of my quilt is these 5 little diamond shapes that will be stitched together. And I wanted something that kind of came out from the center of each one of the diamond pieces. And I could really only narrow it down to the flower, the pretty kind of Tiffany blue flower, and this cool little leafy flower. So I'm gonna do both, and we'll see what each one of them looks like. Maybe I'll end up with 2 Pirouette quilts, I don't know. So I take one of the pieces that I'm gonna use, and if I kind of put it over top of the flower that I think I want to use, well, I can't see it. So I took some scrapbooking paper, which is a little thicker than like copy paper, and I cut a reverse out. I cut this as accurately as I possibly could, and I checked it and double checked it. It's still a tiny bit off, but you really need that to be as close as possible. Now with this, now I can put that on top of my flowers, and I can see exactly what that piece is going to look like. So what is that piece going to look like then with the other 4 pieces all the way around it? Well, that's kind of difficult to figure out too. So I found this great trick on another YouTube channel that uses mirrors. I picked up these locker mirrors. You can see my whole setup now. I picked up these locker mirrors at the Dollar Tree. So I paid $1 for them, and I just taped them together with some masking tape. They have a frame around them, which I wasn't really sure about. I actually got one and tried to take the frame off of it. That did not end up working well at all. There was plastic and glass all over the place. So at your own risk, try to remove any of the frames that are on the mirrors that you get. Also, if you decide to go to remove one of the frame's roots, get an extra mirror to practice on, because that might be destroyed. I took 2 trips to the Dollar Tree for this project for sure. But one of the nifty little things that you can do is take the mirror, you get 2 of them, I taped these together, and you just line that mirror up with the edge of your reverse template. And then you can kind of look inside and see what your completed motif is kind of going to look like. You're not going to get an exact replica because, first of all, it's mirrors and mirrors make things reverse. But it's really going to give you a grand idea of how things are going to come together. Worst case scenario, do what I did, choose 2 motifs that you like and cut out both of them. You don't have to sew them together if you don't like them, but cut out 2 or 3 different motifs and place them together once you have them basted onto your paper pieces, and then you get a really good idea of what it's going to look like. So I took my reverse template and I very carefully chose the 2 motifs, actually this one and this one, that I wanted to use. And then I had to mark where this piece is so that I know where to cut it out and how to line the piece up along the paper piece. To do my marking, I had a couple of choices. I usually use, especially on lighter fabrics, I use a friction erasable pen that you can get at the office supply store or on Amazon, and a lot of times they sell them at your quilt shops now. This is a darker fabric though, and the blue pen isn't going to show up on my blue background. So I used a sliver of soap. What I really like about using soap for darker fabrics is that it's a very fine point on these sharp edges. If you need to sharpen the edges more, you just wash your hands. You have to let the soap dry after that, but you just wash your hands. It's something that I always have around the house anyway, usually, and it washes out and sometimes kind of disappears with time even. My mom used soap a lot of times if she would get a quilting fabric that kind of looked the same, the reverse side looked the same as the front side, like if it was a solid color or something, in order to make sure she always used the correct side, she would soap mark all over the back of the fabric so that she could tell the front from the back, and then that just washed out, and that worked out great. So I've taken my soap and I have traced the outline of my first quilt piece. Once I take the template away, I need to cut out the piece. Most people will do either a 1/4 inch seam or a 3/8 inch seam. I'm not really sure which exactly I want to do because this is my first English paper piecing project. So I've actually, like I said, I'm doing 2 different motifs for the middle just to see which one I like more. I'm doing one at a 1/4 inch seam and one at 3/8 of an inch seam. I'm also going to baste them in 2 different ways too to see which of the basting techniques I prefer. Once you cut out your first piece with that 1/4 or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance on it, a neat way to get the exact same cut on your fabric is to take that first fabric and place it over top of your big piece of fabric, lining up every single little place that you can. Now remember, this is fabric, and fabric is going to shift. It probably shifted a little bit when you starched your fabric. It shifted if you washed your fabric. It's going to shift again when you wash your fabric. It's going to shift as you use your quilt. But you can, if you can get it as close as you possibly can, then just pin your first piece that you're going to cut out on top of your second piece, and your third piece, and your fourth piece, your fifth piece, and that way you can at least cut out your fabric really quick and easy. I'm going to cut this. I actually don't want to cut the edge of my fabric, so I'm going to cut. Your seam allowance does not need to be exact, especially this first time you're cutting your fabric out. Here's another note on something I learned while I was doing this. As you're choosing the motif that you want to use, make sure you have enough of that motif on your piece of fabric. These two motifs that I chose, I only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't think I have 6. I think I just have 5 of these motifs. So if I had 6 pieces in the center, I would not have been able to do this with this piece of fabric. So make sure you count that. Look really well at your fabric before you start cutting away on it. Now that I have this cut out roughly, I can cut out my seam allowances a little better. So I'm doing about 1/4 inch seam allowance here, doing about a 3/8 inch seam allowance here. I don't know how much having a proper seam allowance really matters here. I am guessing that as we get further down the road and putting these pieces together, it will be nicer to have nice, pretty seam allowances. I think the corners of each of the pieces will look a lot better if the seam allowances are pretty trim, are in good shape, and not just haphazard. So we'll have those nice and trimmed up pretty. So now we have 2 pieces of fabric. I do have my motif on the top one. The bottom one, I still need to trace that. So I want to take my reverse template and I want to look at where my markings are on my first piece that I have cut out. So I'm looking at this marking right here and seeing that it's right down here at this corner, and I'm looking at this marking up here and seeing that it is just about half of that little blue spot. And I'm going to get those as accurate as I can. And I'm going to hold my breath and hold down the fabric. And outline my fabric piece. And there I have another one with a pretty good outline on it. I'm gonna do this one real quick. This is my second one. Again, now you might be able to tell that for you, it might be easier to use this reverse template on the large piece of fabric. You may not want to cut out the smaller pieces first. You may want to draw your outline on onto your piece while you still have the big piece of fabric underneath you. Because this is a little fiddly once I get the soap out and start scraping it across that fabric. So the place where I'm being super, super pristine about is down here in this corner, because this is where all of my pieces are going to come together in a little circle. I think that's how I'm going to do it. So that's where I want to be the most precise. And then the second place I'm looking on this one is up here in this corner, and then down here in this corner. And I think that is pretty good. Trace that out. Yeah, I really feel like I should have waited to trim these edges up really tight, because I think it would have been easier to trace these if I had a little more fabric to work with around the outside of my template. So now we have our pieces, and we can baste them now to our English paper pieces. A couple ways to do that, because there's a couple ways to do everything. The first way I'm going to do is the glue stick. So this is the piece that I have chosen to use glue sticks on. It's the one with my 3/8 inch seam allowance. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, I actually have a couple of these done already. I'm going to take one that I already have done, and I'm going to press these around while I'm looking at one that's already done. And for some reason that doesn't look right, because I'm not, oh yeah. So see, this one needs to come really far here. And what I need to do first, so I want to kind of line it up along the marks that I've made, and then see if it matches up with that. This does not. I need to come way up here to bend that over and see if it matches this. And that kind of does. Let's see. I'm going to bring this a little further back. And what I'm going to do is just finger press this down. And then I'm going to come over to do this other side here. And once I've got my fabric piece all lined up as well as I can around my template, there's a couple different ways that we can baste this. So the first way we're going to do is with a glue stick. And really, you're just gluing these tabs down. Easy peasy. Run the glue stick across it, fold the seam allowances under. And you can see I'm going in a counterclockwise direction. And whichever direction you go, you want to go the same direction with every piece. That helps your little corners that stick out. It helps them nest together really nicely in the end, so you don't have too much bulk. And then when you get around to that original edge that you did, you want to tuck that last edge underneath that first edge so that you've got them overlapping the same direction all the way around your piece. The other way to baste is with a needle and thread. So this one, once again, I'm going to eyeball it and finger press. I'm looking at both my outline on here and my design on my fabric. And I'm just finger pressing that. Do it here. Let's see if that looks similar. Really does. Does this one look the same? There. Yeah, pretty good. And I'm using a pretty big needle for this because my eyes really suck lately. And I'm using a contrast thread. My earlier ones, I used a real thin white thread, but I want to be able to see this thread later because we are going to take it out. So I really want to get a good view and be able to see this thread and pick it out very easily. So I've got a big knot at the end here. I'm really not happy the way this is lining up right now. All right. We're going to go in from the back side because when we're ripping this out, we're going to be doing it from the back side of the quilt top. So I'm going to put one little tuck stitch there. Some places that I've read only sew the corners. That's hard for me to do, especially for this first edge, because the first edge on this is pretty long and I really want to know that I've got my edges lined up well. So I'm just doing big honking stitches, just one or two on the edge to get across there. And then I'm going to tuck this next one edge down. Make sure you put a stitch on each corner. That is super, super important. This is actually difficult enough to do at this table that I may go back and change this up. We'll see. And if you see, I'm still trying to match my pattern this whole way that I'm going around. I also feel like I'm going around a different direction than I was with the glue basting, and that's fine as long as because these are going to be two different quilt tops. Now I'm really eking the edge there. See, there's not much of a seam allowance there. Am I on my motif pretty well? I am. So I may have cut that one a little too close to the edge. I'm going to do an extra stitch here in the corner because that seam allowance is so tight. Put one on the edge. On the edge here. Needle down for a hot second so I can get that. How does that look? Does that look about the same? Oh, that looks pretty good. And I'm catching that corner there. And this is just basting. So this is quick and the stitching is sloppy. The lining up of the pattern, not sloppy, but the stitching is sloppy. And then once we get around to here again, we'll tuck that one under. I'm going to go through the corner. And we want this to lie flat. I want to kind of pull it tight, but I also want this piece to lie flat. You don't want to have it curled up or something like that along the edge. And you don't really need to leave a knot, so to speak, because we're going to be coming back and taking this out later anyway. So leave it. Okay, so now that you have your pieces, I am going to have to go back and do that again. That's sloppy. Now that you have your pieces on their paper piecing, you can play with them a little bit. I can start to see what my motif is going to look like. These two, I've actually gone ahead and sewn together. So I can kind of see what my motif is going to look like there. I could have taken these and played with them a little more. I could have done it in this direction to see what that's going to look like. This motif, see why I'm liking this one too? See how cool that looks? See, there's a whole new flower starting in the middle here. So I've created my own pattern. I've created my own fabric from this fabric that already existed with all of these pretty colors already available to me. And I think that one's going to be a great little center as well. Oh, I really wasn't planning on ending up with 2 quilts. We'll see what happens. So that's that. There's some stuff about fussy cutting and how to get your fabric basted on to your English paper pieces. And now I'm ready to start sewing and start cutting out some more pieces soon. So I get to go to the fabric shop again and shop for some coordinating fabric. Or maybe I'll shop for my dresser drawers and see what I already have in the stash. We'll see. Next time though, I think I want to talk about tools because I still have a lot of questions about marking tools. I have a ton of questions about needles. I don't know what size needle means what. So I'm going to do some research on that and get that kind of stuff together for you. And come back next time and we will talk about that together and maybe we'll learn some things together. That will be fun. So thanks so much for sticking in here with me. I appreciate your time. That sounded stupid. So come back next time and let's talk about that together. Have a good day.